What happens when you cue somebody to drop the elbows, especially as a squat, you get down to the bottom, the elbows drop, it shifts the weight down and back just a little bit, but you'll be surprised how much it reinforces you staying upright and hitting that rebound from a more upright position. Welcome guys to this Patreon exclusive. This is a perk that I just started offering members of my Patreon community. Every week or so, I'll offer to do program reviews. So members will upload or link videos of their lifts, and we'll try to get to the bottom of problems that they might be having. Some of them might just want to know if they're on the right track, if their setup makes sense for their build, if there's anything they should tweak to get more efficiency or more mileage out of their setup. Others are going to have direct problems that they're trying to solve, knee valgus on a squat, back rounding on a deadlift, and so on. So let's get into these videos. Hopefully you guys can pull something useful out of it to apply to your training or your coaching. Real quick, I want to give a shout out to Barbell Apparel for sponsoring this video. Go to barbellapparel.com/Bromley for 10% off the most comfortable training gear on the market. All right, so first up we have Logan. Recently, I switched from Sumo to conventional. I've pulled 425 Sumo, but I'm much weaker conventional. This is my 6th set of 3 at 260 pounds. Any advice for my conventional pull? So assuming this guy is better at Sumo than conventional, which a lot of lifters find out early on because it's just more comfortable to start in an upright position and you can pull more aggressively. It's less cumbersome, especially if you're a leggy lifter. So you tend to see a big gap early on with lifters that start out with Sumo. It's one of the reasons I don't like it as an introductory developmental exercise, because it shortcuts being bent over and learning how to hinge in that really awkward position where your torso is more parallel to the ground. Now, 425 Sumo, it's a decent lift. We're talking about early intermediate territory. That's definitely stronger than the average person, but we're not quite into that range where you have like a fully fleshed out, well-rounded lifter. My guess just from this, if he's much weaker at conventional, it's because he doesn't apply himself as often or as frequently to conventional. But let's take a look at his lift and see what we can find. All right, so he's a little leggy. This isn't exceptionally long. He's not way pitched over. Leggy isn't just are your legs long, it's length relative to the torso. So this looks like a pretty long femur. It's definitely longer than my femurs, but his torso looks like it balances out. So he has somewhat of an even build. But you see, with this bend in his knee, his hips are still back. He's still pitched over quite a bit. I guarantee you this is much less upright than where he starts on his Sumo pulls. And that's going to explain the increased difficulty, the decrease in amount of weight that he can handle. Now, picking apart his technique, it looks pretty good. I mean, he's in a nice neutral position here. His back isn't overly arched. It's also not rounded. It's a nice neutral compact position. He's doing the maneuver as he loads into the bar where his hips are pumping back and down a little bit to prime for the leg drive. And because of the length of his legs, he's not going to be squatting very deep into the bar. He's not going to be getting back much more than this. His hips are already a good distance away. Look at that horizontal distance between his hip and the barbell. That's a pretty big moment arm right there. Again, a much bigger moment arm than what you're going to see on a Sumo deadlift. So as far as cues, as far as things that he could do or change or fix, I don't see a lot. My instinct is that this is a guy that just needs a lot more work, a lot more practice. This is actually a good working range too. I mean, the fact that he's dialed the weight back quite a bit to where he can lift confidently and explosively, nice clean lockout, bringing the hips right into the bar, not just pulling up, but to the knee, hips through. That's nice. Snapping the hips forward like at the top of a kettlebell swing. That looks really good. I like the pump that he does to get started. Hips backing down, pull. I think that's really good. And I think the rest is just rote practice. A lot of sub-maximal sets just like this. Be very gentle, very ginger with the way that you implement progressive overload, because the second the weight gets to that certain heavy threshold where you're starting to grind, this is going to break down. You're going to start to hate conventional. It's going to feel worse, and you're going to build a bunch of bad habits. So I think Logan is A-okay here. I think you have a really good deadlift form. I think any changes you make, because you're going to run into people that want to give erroneous advice, because in situations like this, you always get people that give erroneous advice. Like, it's tempting to look at this and be like, well, what worked for me is I brought my feet in 2 millimeters and I threw my hips back a couple extra inches and I looked up to the sky and screamed Geronimo, and then I pulled, and that worked really well. There is a very distinct difference between giving cues because you're trying to solve a problem and giving cues because you're thinking, hey, just try this. Maybe this will be the magic thing that clicks for you. And that usually just distracts people. That usually just gets people to focus on the wrong things, major in the minors, as they say. And it takes attention away from just the rope practice you need. The biggest rule is that you get good at how you train. Beyond that, you have to look at how you train and say, okay, is this causing any issues, injuries, inflammation, any problems? Am I having trouble recovering from this? Or are there obvious inefficiencies that are going to limit my growth? If the answer is no, then do what you're comfortable doing, because that's going to be where you can be aggressive and consistent. So Logan, I think you're on the right track. Just keep doing what you're doing. Going down to Gage Ellerding. Overhead press has been plateaued for a bit, adding pin press and dips as accessories in my current program to help it. My overhead press feels very all or nothing. Either I can hit 185 for a double or it doesn't go up at all. Been trying to lock down my form, adjusting grip width, keeping elbows stacked. I often get stuck around my forehead. 2 videos here, 185 for a double and 195 for a miss. Any thoughts on my form here? So let's look at this 185 for a double. Okay. So you see the bar sticking pretty aggressively around his face, forehead area. Now, this is what I thought reading the post. If you're doing a strict press and overhead press starting from the bottom position, it's just like a deadlift. The first rep's going to be very hard. All the reps after that are going to be much easier. So you might look at 185 for a double and do some math and think, oh, I should have like a 195 or 200 pound 1 rep max. And that's not the case. Same with your deadlift. Imagine if you were doing a squat and you had to start from the bottom, like set the bar on the pins, crawl underneath it, get into the bottom position and squat up, how much weaker you would be in that position. But then once you stand up, imagine how much easier every rep would be. Being able to use stretch reflex to come down to get that rebound and pop back up, that gives you quite a bit. So it's not surprising that your 1 rep max is also your 2 rep max. With my deadlift, the most weight I've ever pulled from the ground is 725. It's also a weight that I was able to bounce through 5 reps. So it's a big difference between dead stop and cycling through reps using stretch reflex. So I don't really expect to see a lot here that might give us some insight into how he might change his technique to do better. I think the weight's just too heavy. It goes up and then it comes back down. The weight doesn't look like it's drifting forward. Then that's a bad move going at it again. It takes time, it takes experience to know exactly how your body fatigues, and then eventually it becomes very predictable. And you'll know the difference between a missed rep because I was out of position or because I wasn't psyched up enough, and a missed rep just because it's too heavy. This is just too heavy. This is just too much weight. So it's not going to go up. Stacking your elbows, finding more tension in the lats. You're not going to cue your way to a 200-pound strict press. At this point, everything looks good. And this is very often the issue with lifting. Once your technique gets straightened out, the rest is running the program in a way that causes the growth that leads to more numbers. So I think you're completely fine. Your technique looks good. The bar isn't drifting in front. You're not doing anything wonky. Your torso, your midsection looks stable. So I don't really know where you have room to clean anything up in a way that's going to give you a little bit more on your press. I think you just have to keep running the program. I would actually tell you to stay away from 1 rep maxes. I would tell you to stay away from 3 rep maxes. You should be doing a lot of volume, a lot of reps, a lot of sets, putting some mass on your frame. You're going to want to gain 5 to 10 pounds at least before you see another sizable jump in your overhead press. So look to that. Just get your upper body filled out. Don't ignore the triceps. Don't ignore a delt isolation. And I promise you, this lift will start to move. All right, then we got another frequent poster, Justin Milkey. He's got 2 videos here. First 2 sets of deadlifting, 305 for sets of 4. After recording the first one, I realized the plates were in the way, so I recorded the second one at a different angle. 305 for sets of 4. All right, let's look at the other one. Oh, okay, we got the nice ass shot angle. There we go. So you can already see that his setup's a bit different from Logan, the first guy we looked at, because Logan was just a little bit more leggy. Justin looks a little more stocky and compact. This is how I feel like I get set up in a deadlift. The shorter femurs kind of require you to squat down and rock back a little bit more to stay a little more upright. So you see you got a bit more of an upright torso position. Spine's neutral. Bar looks like it's staying close. don't really see any issues here. This is just an interesting comparison between how different builds are going to lend themselves to different setups. With guys like this, leg drive is going to be the big thing. So you want to make sure your legs are strong. That hip power that comes like when you're pushing a leg press sled, that's how you're going to start your deadlifts. So actually leg pressing does work. Pause squats work. Box squats, dead stop, working on firing up off the box at or even slightly above parallel carries over to starting strength here very, very well. Deficits will as well. But you also want to concern yourself with rigidness around this midsection right here, because it is much harder and a bit more awkward to maintain that position, that kind of upright position while you're squatted down. So you want that upper back and midsection to be exceptionally strong so you can get the most out of your legs. Because if your legs are strong, if you're a big squatter and you can fire into the barbell, but your midsection or upper back can't hang, you're going to run into problems. That's how you're going to get yanked out of position. But it looks like the bar's staying close to his legs. Looks like he's scooping his hips through pretty quickly at the top. Hips through, good. So the only thing I would say, and this is common with a lot of clients and video submissions, people being subconsciously worried about the camera. So you'll see people look off to the side, and that's a really bad habit. You want your eyes just glued, whether you're trying to keep a neutral cervical spine, keep your neck neutral by looking down and kind of in the corner. And that's kind of a cool way to really put the focus on what your knees and hips are doing. You'll become more aware. You'll kind of lead with those. I typically don't like cues that involve cranking your head up or bringing your chest out to try to lead your knees and hips. You should be able to move your knees and hips in a deliberate fashion based on what the best position is, instead of having to like yank yourself from one end to like trick you into getting into that position. But I would just tell Justin, keep the head from going off to the side, but that's a very minor point. It's not like you're going to snap yourself up for doing that. At the ass angle again. Stance looks appropriate. The shadows made it look like his feet were a bit wide at first, but no, his feet are actually pretty narrow. That's an efficient pull. It's a push with a guy that's built like this, a little more upright at the start. It's a push until you get to the knee, and then the hips come through. And I can't see his other hand. I'm assuming he's in a mixed grip. It's possible that his grip is giving him a little trouble if he is double over, and that's throwing the lift off, making it a little slower. This is actually something I see really common with a lot of newer lifters, is they don't feel comfortable going mixed grip, or some of them even think it's cheating, that they need to go double overhand because that's how you build a strong grip. And they certainly don't want to wear straps. And I hate that mentality. The deadlift is amazing for demonstrating and building strength throughout your legs, hips, midsection, upper back. Your hands should not be the limiting factor. If you take the guys with the strongest hands in the world, they can't hold on to the heaviest deadlifts double overhand. So your potential to get your grip strong enough to handle those loads, you're never going to get strong enough to be able to keep up with your legs, back, and hips. That's just the way it is. So get comfortable with a mixed grip, a hook grip, or when those become difficult or untenable, if you're worried about a bicep injury, or even on high volume deadlift workouts, your skin gets chewed up, wear straps. You don't need to train your grip every single set that you do. So that's another one. I would tell you to practice in straps. If you're really worried about grip strength, you can do some deadlift holds at the end of the workout. You can do some other grip work, plate pinches, dumbbell holds, long farmer walks. There's a lot of options, but train your grip to train your grip. When you're deadlifting, legs, hips, midsection, upper back, those need to get the lion's share of the work. And you can't have your grip failing if that's what you're trying to do. Going down into Allison, I'm learning how to sumo deadlift, and I deloaded my deadlift to learn the skill. I'm currently running volume and intensity from base strength. Love it so far. I'm very glad to hear that. Here's the deadlift AMRAP, 55 kilograms for 6, until I felt like my adductors were about to lose form. I felt like the weight was on the outsides of my feet. Looking at the video, it looks like my right lower leg might not be completely at a right angle in the start position. Any tips for finding the right foot placement or other form issues you notice? Thanks a bunch. Love your content. All right, let's take a look at Allison and see what this looks like. All right, so our starting position is pretty good. I mean, the important thing at the start, and let's see if we can get it right as she pulls. Right as she pulls, she's pretty upright, much more upright than you're going to be in a conventional deadlift. So you want to, if you're practicing sumo as a skill, you want to learn how to take advantage of the leverages. So starting in that upright position, hips down, she's squatted down. If she squats any lower, she's not going to get any leg drive. It's going to be too awkward to maintain position. And if her hips come up any higher, then it's going to be like a stiff leg sumo. So I think her hip angle is about right. And I think the level that it's at, the depth her hips are at, is about right. This looks like about the posture and about the joint angles that she's going to be in when she's a really developed sumo deadlifter. So good job there. I don't think there's a lot to work on there. I think your foot placement is good. The big thing I think is going to be the knees. And this is going to be an interesting question because not everybody has the capacity to shove their knees way out to the side. That's a limiting factor with sumo deadlifts. It's not just limb proportions, it's how are your hips shaped. So if your hips are shaped completely forward, you're not going to be able to get your knees out very far because they're physically going to run into bone. Your femurs in the hip socket will be physically stopped as they try to swivel out to the side. It also might be mobility. I mean, people talk about the mobility required to pull sumo. Part of it's the hip shape. It might be some musculature that you can kind of stretch and roll out and get a little more range from. You might, I don't know, your toes look like they're pointed out plenty far enough. I wouldn't tell you to point your toes farther. But wherever your toes point, that's where you want your knees to track. So if you point your toes out, oh my God, I saw a girl doing this at Gold's Gym the other day and almost lost my mind. She was doing a wide stance squat with her feet turned almost 90 degrees from center, and her knees were valgusing in hard. Like she was trying to get this, it reminded me of arm wrestling. Like she was trying to get this leverage by getting her toes out very far, but she was getting this opposite force coming in as her knees were collapsing. And it reminded me of like an arm wrestling break. It looked like her leg was just going to snap. So you want to avoid that type of torque, that type of tension. You want everything stacked, so knees should be over the foot. That's what you're gunning for. You might find if it turns out that your hips don't accommodate your knees coming out a little further, you might find that bringing your stance in an inch or two just to get your feet under your knees might actually be the ticket. Something closer to like an Ed Cohen frog stance, you know, not maybe that close, but you'll be surprised what an inch will do. So it's that trade-off. You get a little more range, millimeters of range, but if it puts you in a stronger, more efficient starting position, then you're good. You're golden. You're gonna win that way as opposed to working against your build. So that would be my recommendation. But for starting out, for just learning the skill, you look really, really good here. Careful with the AMRAPs because AMRAP sets imply that you're good enough with a movement that you can really milk it and take it into the weeds and get that intensity. If you can't really apply that much effort because you're constantly keeping one foot off the gas for your form's sake, then you're not going to develop quite as much. But we're working on skill. It's not quite that important. Just keep paying attention to your cues. As soon as the set feels good, take what you were doing and just pay it forward and continue the process. And eventually, before you know it, you will be a good sumo puller. But I've seen people pull pretty big weight sumo with worse setup than this. So I think you're on the right track. Okay, going into Jokem. Correct me if I mispronounced that. 4 by 292 freedom units. Last week of bull massive peak phase, but finding a better bar path for squats lately, but apparently not with this kind of weight yet. Enjoy the ugly 4th rep. Deadlifts come more natural to me than squats. Low bar tends to give me elbow issues, so I'm sticking with high bar squats. So I'm guessing he's going to be a leggy guy. That's typically what you see with people that like to pull and hate to squat, especially low bar. He's probably more comfortable because he can make it more of a hip hinge, but it gives him elbow issues. So if he's going high bar, hey, that's great. You know, it's going to be a lot of quad development. That's going to be a lot of general mobility and muscular development, but it's going to be awkward. Load's not going to be as high. So from a pure strength specific standpoint, it's taken a couple steps back to go a few steps forward. And he looks like it. Look how forward this knee angle is. I know when I'm asked to grass, my knees are not that far forward. My shins are not angled that far forward. So that has to happen to clear space. So yeah, he's got a lot of height in his femurs. Also, look where his shoulders are relative to his knees. When I squat down in this position, my knees are behind my nipples. So that gives you some insight. And he's very upright here. You know, he's not bent forward. This is a good upright squat. But the hips are still tracking way back, knees are still tracking forward. But this is pretty good. I mean, for a high bar squat from a leggy guy, this is a pretty good setup. So not a lot to critique here so far. Again, my advice for guys that run into problems with how intuitively a lift fits their build, more rope practice. It's not sexy, but that's all it is. It's just find something that's passable. You look really passable here. This is good. I wouldn't tell you to change anything so far. And just do it, and do it over and over and over. And your best sets, your best work that is going to ingrain this stuff in, it's not the max effort sets. It's not the hard working sets. It's not the AMRAP sets. It's going to be all the warm-ups on the way up. It's going to be all the back off sets on the way down. It's going to be all the sets you do where the weight's light enough where you can put it where you want to. That's how you ingrain the best movement patterns. And ideally, your working weight is done right at the threshold of where you hold that together. And if you can be disciplined enough to keep it there, you're going to be great. You're going to notice the bar tick up, and the weight at which you fail, fatigue, lose form is going to move higher and higher. It's going to move closer and closer to a true 1 rep max, and that's what you want. Bounce, hip scoop. Yeah, you can see the hips wanting to lead. This guy probably has a very strong posterior relative to a squat. Well, he does, given the numbers. So you see everything drift back. The hips want to rise up, but the quads are doing their job. I mean, they didn't let those hips pop up and turn it into a good morning. So high bars must be doing something. You're looking more comfortable relying on your quads even when you get out of position. Good bounce. Let's see, deep breath. Good bounce up. Good. He's scooping the hips, so he's emphasizing rolling the hips through. So at this point, there's only 2 things I can comment on. Thing 1 is the elbow position. Low bar, I like to pigeon wing my elbows up like this, and I go thumbless to take some pressure off my shoulders. So I don't recommend doing it if you're feeling a lot of torque through your shoulder, through your upper arm. But I do like the security of picking my elbows up a little bit. It just feels good to me. But I know that can cause bicep tendon issues. I know that can cause shoulder and elbow issues for guys. High bar, I would actually tell you to drop the elbows down. What happens when you cue somebody to drop the elbows, especially as a squat, you get down to the bottom, the elbows drop, it shifts the bar, it shifts the weight down and back just a little bit, but you'll be surprised how much it reinforces you staying upright and hitting that rebound from a more upright position. It's a good way to reinforce really solid high bar position. So experiment with it. It's not a deal breaker, but if you do a set and you realize at the bottom, if you roll your elbows under, everything opens up, your head's gonna lead, your chest is gonna lead, you're gonna intuitively find yourself in a position where your legs can just fire down into the ground. It's a really nice tweak to those who benefit from that type of positioning. So this might help your high bar be a little bit more comfortable. So just try it out. Second thing, with your build, it'd be helpful to see where your feet are, because I can't see how closer or wide your feet are. I can't see where your toes are pointed. You might, even as a leggy squatter who's having trouble high bar, you might benefit from taking your feet out just a little wider, playing with your toe angle, because clearing space out to the side with guys with long legs, moving your knees out, clearing space for your hips to drop down, that's what a lot of leggy Olympic lifters do, because they have to stay so upright to catch cleans and snatches and do their front squats and so on. So consider that. Consider wedging out to clear a little more space. It shortens the front to back distance, should be a little easier to stay upright. Also, I can't tell what kind of shoes you're using. If you're not using lifters, try putting your heels on a 2.5 pound plate, a small weight plate. If that feels better, if that feels good, that allows your knee to track forward more, a little more easily. That's going to improve your positioning, and then you're justified in looking into some lifters. So that's my advice for that. Going into your deadlifts, oh look, we got some plates on the bar. Yeah, it's not just long legs. You have long tibias, pretty obviously long tibias. That's a long way to pull the bar until it gets over your knee. And that's kind of evident by that kind of awkward transition. The shorter your tibia is, the earlier the bar gets over the knee, so you can get into your strongest possible position sooner. Because once the bar is over the knee's out of the way, you can crank back and shoot the hips through. So it should go as the bar is tracking up, getting closer to your knee. You're pulling, you lose momentum, gets harder, harder, harder. The second the bar is over your knee, hips through, rocking back. That should be the fastest part of the lift. Because this guy has to wait. He has to wait. He has to get more upright before he can do that. there's a pretty nasty sticking point around the knee. This is a very unique build. There are not a lot of people built like this that are going to run into this problem. So you see, it almost looks like the knees want to lock out because you're fighting to keep the bar going over that hump to get it through. See right there, bar at the knee and the knees are almost locked out. That's a weak position. Now the question is, can you even physically get in a position where your knees are still a little bent so they can contribute to the lockout more when the weight is above the knee? Because right here, this is like a stiff-legged rack pull. This is just all hammies right here. And you're going to want your hammies as strong as possible if this is how you have to pull, to make sure that they're thick enough and strong enough to do their job at this point. Because every inch the bar goes up past the knee, you're stronger, should be a more aggressive, faster, snappier lockout. So assuming that you can't get in a different position, and looking at you, I don't know that it's obvious you could. Again, you could experiment with moving your feet, moving your toes, wedging your knees out. I don't know how much ground that's going to give you given your build. I would actually really just spend a lot of time in this position right here. I would do a shit ton of pause deadlifts. I would pause at this position right here. I'd make sure you're keeping your knees just a little soft, just enough to where there's some extension as you lock out, so it's not just your hips. And just get your hammies as thick and as strong as you can. That's really it. I would really pay a lot of attention to starting speed on your deadlift. I would do everything you could to be able to pull faster off the start, because the more momentum you have on the bar, the more you're comfortable accelerating through, the less of a burden that stick point is going to represent. So when you're warming up, when you're doing back down sets, focus on the starting speed and focus on accelerating the whole way through. And I would do ample amounts of deficit work in addition to pause work. I would have you pause 2 spots. I would have you pause at the knee, and then I would have you do separate work, pausing like a millimeter off the ground, where you just break the weight, hold it, and then accelerate. And that'll teach you to put in more force from a complete dead stop. But this is the thing you need the least amount of work with. I mean, there's things you can do to address this unique circumstance, but you're a strong deadlifter. And the same advice applies to you that applies to everybody else. More rope practice, more volume, adapt to greater levels of work, and these numbers will tick up. And I have a feeling if I look at you in a couple of years and this is, 540 instead of 440, it's probably going to look the same. So also know it's worthwhile to try to attack weak points and work around them. But also, as things tick forward, as everything grows, you're always going to have a weak point. So don't obsess over things being absolutely flawless. We want to focus on the things that are obviously lagging, where we know we can get a lot of mileage by bringing them up. All right, so we got Aaron Nelson up here. Humble brag, I invented the front squat to Zercher squat superset. Really though, this is like my 3rd time attempting a front squat. I'm trying to work it in because it seems like a good exercise. Absolutely is. And I have bag over bar coming up, and I think there's carryover. It's terrible right now, so all advice, good-natured joking is welcome. Would I be better off just doing Zerchers? I also have a 20 rep squat up there. It looks awful, and I'm happy I didn't hurt myself, but I'll take advice if there's any to give. So front squat is a great exercise, carries over to just about everything in strongman in some capacity. Specifically loading events, things where the weight's in front of you and you have to stand up and extend. I mean, that's literally what a front squat is, standing up with weight in front of you. So overloading that, getting strong at that, getting conditioned at that is going to help you out with a lot of strongman stuff. Bag over bar, is a strength movement. You could do worse. I don't know that you're going to see a direct correlation between improving your front squat in the short term and throwing a bigger, heavier bag. Long term, as you increase those numbers by quite a bit, you're going to see some carryover. So there's worse exercises. Bag throwing technique, explosiveness. So do jumps, do explosive kettlebell swings, do tosses, do a lot of tosses, do them on a daily basis if you can, and work on technique. There's some good resources from Highland Games athletes. So I would look into that. So let's take a look at Aaron. So looking at him rack, most uncomfortable position for a lot of people, but I'm happy to see him cross over. A lot of people say that they can't do front squats because it hurts their wrists or elbows. You don't have to do an Olympic rack. It's a neat thing to do, not necessary. I don't do it. Most really big front squatters don't do it. So get the most out of it. Even if you can't accommodate this, you can do the straps where you loop the straps around and hold it upright, maintaining tension. So right here, Aaron looks pretty good. He's upright. I expected him to be dumping forward more. Especially I saw another squat video of his where he does lean forward quite a bit. Here he stays very upright, and that's good. That's a good sign. The problem here isn't in his depth. It isn't in his angle or his ability to keep his chest up with the bar. The problem, as you're going to see as he squats down, is with his feet and his knees. So right there. So if you look right here, you see his arch collapsing. Knee is stacked inside of the foot, which isn't great. It's not like imminent doom, but it's not great. It's not as efficient. Now, normally in squatting, we look at knee valgus as muscle imbalance. Like the adductors, the muscles that keep the knee out to the side, can't keep up with the other muscles that are contracting to actually move you through space. So everything collapses in. This doesn't look like that. This looks like the arch is collapsing. It looks like the weight's rolled over on the inside of his foot. And there's a couple things we can address there. Foot health, hygiene. If you Google arch collapse and lifting, or if you YouTube search it, you're going to find a bunch of tutorials on how you can strengthen your feet. It actually might be why he's squatting barefoot, because that's something they recommend, is lifting barefoot to build up strength, get receptivity of your toes, and more support throughout your entire foot. So that might be why you're doing this. But I would focus on that. There's probably some exercise you can do to kind of shift the shin back over the middle of the foot and to keep the weight displaced more in the center of the foot. So yeah, you want to look, I would emphasize trying to get your weight on the outside of the foot, and that'll make it easier to get that knee swung over. Also, might be tightness through the hip. That's another reason this happens. If you have very tight groin, if you have a lot of tension throughout the musculature of the hip, it can pull everything in and lead to this collapsed arch here. So that's something you want to look at. Bit of squatting before, bit of stretching before you squat is definitely warranted. Something as simple as standing on two boxes with a gap in the middle, holding a kettlebell, and just squatting down into a full ass-to-grass squat until you're as low as you can with the kettlebell still off the ground, and just hang and focus on pushing your knees out, rock back and forth, kind of put some pressure on your ankles, feel out that range. Couple minutes before you squat, and you might notice it's a lot easier to maintain good position here. The other thing is I think the heels should be elevated. You stand a lot more to gain from Olympic lifting shoes on squatting, especially front squatting, than you do from overhead pressing, which is where everybody seems to utilize their Olympic lifting shoes. So start with these small plates, grab some 2.5s or 5s, throw them under your heels. If it feels better, if you can stay more upright, get lower, the knees track forward more easily, look into some Olympic lifting shoes. If not, and it's possible that it won't make a big difference, you might not need to worry about it. But this arch collapse is definitely something you want to look at. So that's all I got for today, guys. I want to thank my Patreon members for coming through with these videos. This gave me a lot of hope, much better than what I anticipated coming into this video. So keep it up, guys. Everybody's doing great, and y'all have miles to go. So I'm excited to see where these guys go. If you're interested in getting your technique looked at, if you want to see how my training goes off, because I upload videos daily, check out Patreon. Easiest way to get in contact with me, easiest way to get direct attention. If you have a video idea, if you have a question to ask, that's where you want to do it. It's just $5 a month. Thank you to Barbell Apparel for sponsoring this video. barbellapparel.com/Bromley for 10% off the most comfortable training gear on the market. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.